Imagine a place where every thought ever conceived by the human mind could converge, where the sum of human knowledge might have surpassed the boundaries of imagination, yet it vanished, leaving only whispers in the sands of time. What if I told you that the absence of a single library, lost in antiquity, may have altered the trajectory of human civilization itself, shaping not only the course of empires but the very wiring of our collective consciousness? The Library of Alexandria is more than a monument of lost scrolls. It is a symbol of our persistent tension between knowledge and mortality, between human curiosity and the fragility of the systems we construct to preserve it. Today, we explore not just the history of this lost library, but the psychological, neurological, and philosophical implications of a world denied access to its collective memory. Why does this matter? Because the story of the Library of Alexandria is a mirror to the human brain, a reflection of our societal networks, and a lesson on the nature of adaptation and perception under constraints that may seem trivial but are profoundly consequential. The Library of Alexandria was conceived in the 3rd century BCE as part of the Ptolemaic vision of cultural and intellectual supremacy. Alexandria itself was not merely a city. It was a neural hub of the ancient Mediterranean, a network of synapses linking scholars, merchants, philosophers, and explorers. Each scroll acquired was akin to a node in a vast cerebral system, a dendritic connection extending humanity's ability to perceive, analyze, and predict its environment. Imagine that the library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the sum of Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian, Indian, and possibly Chinese knowledge of the time. If the human brain can be thought of as a system of interlinked neurons, each contributing to perception and cognition, then the Library of Alexandria was the externalized cortex of civilization. The tragedy lies not only in its destruction but in the lost opportunity to expand the collective intelligence of humanity centuries before the printing press, computers, or the internet. The question that fascinates neuroscientists and historians alike is how the loss of such a repository influences cognitive development at both individual and societal levels. Human memory is notoriously fallible, and we rely heavily on external storage, from notebooks to servers, to preserve what our synapses cannot. The Library of Alexandria represents an extreme example of cognitive outsourcing, where an entire culture attempted to offload the limits of biological memory into a physical, centralized system. Its destruction illustrates a critical principle of both neuropsychology and social dynamics. A system is only as resilient as its redundancy. The collective knowledge encoded in that library was, in essence, a shared working memory for humanity. Losing it was equivalent to a massive synaptic pruning event across the historical brain of civilization, forcing societies to rewire, adapt, and reconstruct knowledge from fragments, a process that shapes not only technological progress, but also the very architecture of cultural perception. From a psychological perspective, the consequences of this loss are profound. The human brain evolved to process threats, rewards, and opportunities in an environment of limited information. Cognitive overload often leads to heuristics, shortcuts that shape decision-making and social behavior. Consider the Ptolemaic scholars who attempted to categorize and preserve knowledge from every corner of the known world. Their endeavor reflects a neurological principle called the information bottleneck, where the mind must filter and compress incoming data to maximize utility without overwhelming cognitive resources. By attempting to store the totality of human knowledge, the Library of Alexandria created a paradoxical condition. It represented both an expansion of capacity and an increased risk of catastrophic information loss. Modern neuroscientists might liken this to the phenomena of synaptic saturation, where the sheer density of connections can paradoxically inhibit learning and recall. The fire that destroyed the library, whether through accident, conquest, or neglect, thus serves as a metaphor for the delicate balance between acquisition and retention, between expansion and fragility, inherent in both neural and societal networks. Philosophically, the lost library challenges our assumptions about progress and inevitability. We often imagine history as a linear accumulation of discoveries, a ladder ascending toward greater knowledge and enlightenment. Yet the story of Alexandria suggests that human progress is contingent, nonlinear, and deeply sensitive to catastrophic events. The metaphorical brain of civilization can be disrupted by single points of failure, reminding us that knowledge is not merely additive but systemic. Each scroll lost was not just information erased. It was a disruption in the network, a missing edge in the graph of collective cognition. Imagine if advanced mathematical concepts, early understandings of electricity, or insights into natural philosophy had survived. Could we have industrialized centuries earlier or mapped the stars with greater precision in antiquity? This thought experiment is not idle speculation. It is an exercise in counterfactual history that illuminates the dynamics of adaptation and resilience in complex systems. The Library of Alexandria also invites us to consider the interplay between memory, perception, and cultural identity. Human societies function as distributed neural networks, with institutions, traditions, and collective narratives acting as memory engrams. When a critical node is lost, the network rewires, often in ways that obscure the original signal. In the centuries following the library's decline, knowledge of science, medicine, and philosophy became fragmented. While some civilizations reconstructed elements of this knowledge, others reinvented the wheel entirely, creating parallel developments separated by centuries. This phenomenon mirrors what neuroscientists call neural compensation, where lost functions are partially restored through alternative pathways. Societies like brains are adaptive, yet adaptation comes at a cost. The loss of the Library of Alexandria may have delayed the maturation of empirical science and systematic inquiry by generations, shaping not only technological timelines but also the perceptual frameworks through which humans interpret reality. The very way we define reason, evidence, and experimentation may be, in part, a consequence of the historical gaps imposed by this loss. An intriguing dimension arises when we examine collective stress and human behavior in the context of lost knowledge. Psychologists note that stress responses are tightly linked to uncertainty and incomplete information. In an environment where the sum of human knowledge is fragmented, societies may respond with conservatism, dogma, or rigid hierarchies, prioritizing stability over exploration. Alexandria's disappearance arguably contributed to periods of intellectual stagnation, not merely through the absence of texts, but through the psychological impact of uncertainty itself. Knowledge structures act as scaffolds, stabilizing cognitive and social development. When these scaffolds vanish, the brain and by extension, society must operate with incomplete models, leading to errors, biases, and conservative decision-making. In this light, the Lost Library is not simply a historical curiosity. It is an experiment in large-scale cognitive ecology, illustrating how information density, distribution, and accessibility influence adaptation, innovation, and collective perception. Even the metaphors we use to understand the past are instructive. The library as a brain externalized into architecture suggests that humanity has long sought to overcome the limitations of its neural substrate. A library is more than storage. It is an extension of perception, a system for refining the signal from chaos. In modern terms, consider how digital networks emulate this principle, storing vast quantities of information and enabling pattern recognition at scales impossible for individual cognition. Yet, as with the Library of Alexandria, the fragility of such systems remains. Centralized knowledge is vulnerable to collapse, whether by fire, political upheaval, or technological failure. History teaches us that redundancy, decentralization, and network resilience are not merely technical concerns but fundamental principles of cognitive survival. In other words, the story of the Lost Library is as much about systems thinking and network theory as it is about scrolls and papyrus. And yet, here is the twist that reframes our understanding. The very vulnerabilities exposed by the library's destruction may have catalyzed adaptive capacities in human civilization. By forcing knowledge to scatter, to exist in multiple nodes across time and space, societies may have developed redundancy, creativity, and resilience that a centralized repository could never provide. Cognitive science calls this distributed cognition, where intelligence is not localized but emerges from interactions across agents and environments. In a paradoxical sense, the loss of the Library of Alexandria might have strengthened the human species' capacity to survive, to innovate under constraint, and to navigate uncertainty. What appears as catastrophic at first glance may, from a systemic perspective, be a protective mechanism embedded in the dynamics of complex networks. The brain, after all, thrives on both stability and variability. Too much centralization risks brittleness, while controlled dispersion fosters adaptability. Perhaps the Lost Library, in its absence, became a hidden architect of human resilience. Consider, for example, the ripple effects in mathematics and astronomy. The transmission of knowledge through fragmented networks required scholars to reconstruct and reinterpret information. In doing so, they engaged in forms of problem-solving and abstraction that may not have occurred had all knowledge been centralized and preserved. Stressful, incomplete systems force innovation, compelling the human mind to generate heuristics, analogies, and experiments that shape cognitive evolution. The Library of Alexandria, in its hypothetical survival, might have offered efficiency, but perhaps at the cost of the very creative pressures that drive scientific leaps. This is a profound illustration of a neuropsychological principle. Constraint can catalyze ingenuity, and loss can create the conditions for emergent intelligence. History, viewed through this lens, is not merely a record of accumulation, but a dynamic interplay of scarcity, adaptation, and perception. The philosophical implications extend further. If knowledge shapes perception, and perception shapes action, then gaps in collective memory influence the trajectory of civilizations in ways that are simultaneously subtle and monumental. The Library of Alexandria reminds us that progress is not inevitable. It is contingent, fragile, and emergent. By studying the psychology of historical knowledge loss, we can better understand contemporary challenges, the management of digital information, the resilience of social networks, and the ethical responsibilities inherent in controlling access to knowledge. In essence, the story of the library is a meditation on temporality, epistemology, and the ethics of memory. Every scroll lost represents not only a fact or theory denied, but a potential pathway of thought, a neuron in the extended brain of humanity that could have sparked alternative worlds. We are also compelled to ask questions about our modern cognitive ecology. Today, digital platforms, cloud storage, and artificial intelligence serve as our externalized hippocampus, yet they are similarly vulnerable to centralization, obsolescence, and manipulation. Are we repeating the patterns of the past? Will future historians look back at our age and ask what knowledge was lost not to fire, but to neglect, algorithmic bias, or information overload? The Library of Alexandria provides a historical lens to examine these questions, offering both caution and inspiration. It is a testament to the human endeavor to expand cognition beyond biological limits and a reminder that every system, no matter how sophisticated, is subject to entropy. The philosophical resonance is profound. The pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the pursuit of wisdom, not just in content but in the design and stewardship of the systems that carry it forward. In the end, the lost Library of Alexandria is not merely an absence. It is a presence in our collective imagination, a signal that informs our understanding of cognition, society, and history. It is a testament to the paradoxical interplay of knowledge, vulnerability, and adaptation. By contemplating what was lost, we gain insights into how societies organize, how minds perceive, and how civilizations endure. The fire that destroyed the library may have obliterated scrolls, but it illuminated principles of human resilience, network dynamics, and the psychology of learning under constraint. It challenges us to reflect on the structures we build, the knowledge we value, and the ways in which our collective memory shapes perception, decision-making, and the unfolding of history itself. So as you close your eyes and imagine the vast halls of Alexandria filled with scrolls, imagine also the cognitive networks, the systemic connections, the distributed minds of countless scholars interacting, debating, and discovering. Reflect on how the brain of humanity operates not just through acquisition but through loss, not just through centralization but through the scattering of knowledge across time and space. Ask yourself, what might we be missing today, in ways that will shape the centuries to come? How do we, as a species, navigate the delicate balance between preserving knowledge and allowing the pressures of constraint to generate new forms of insight? And perhaps most intriguingly, how does the tension between fragility and resilience, loss and adaptation, define the very essence of human history?